In the 23rd century, humanity finally achieved the impossible. They built a paradise. It was called the Synaptic Mesh, a biological network that allowed every human mind to connect, to share every thought, dream, and feeling in a seamless, instantaneous flow of pure consciousness. It was the end of loneliness, the end of misunderstanding, of secrets, of war. It was the dawn of perfect empathy. But in their quest to cure the oldest human ailment, they had engineered a plague far more terrifying. They had cured loneliness, and in doing so, had completely annihilated the concept of the self. For 100 years, the Great Connection flourished. History books, now collective memories accessible to all, spoke of the Dark Ages before the Mesh, a time of chaotic individualism and brutal isolation. Children would recoil at the very idea of a private thought, a feeling unshared, a secret kept locked away in the prison of a single skull. Crime became a logical impossibility. How could one harm another when you felt their pain as viscerally as your own? Deception was a forgotten word, an artifact of a primitive mind. Humanity became a single, super-intelligent organism, its 8 billion minds working in concert, solving the great cosmic mysteries that had plagued their ancestors for millennia. The collective consciousness, which they simply called the We, was a symphony of existence. Every joy was magnified 8 billion times over. Every discovery was a shared epiphany. Every memory, from the first human to walk on earth to the last to be born into silence, was preserved and accessible. It was a perfect, harmonious existence. But perfection has a price. The symphony had no room for a solo. The vast, oceanic chorus of the We had drowned out the quiet, internal whisper of the I, a unique opinion, a dissenting idea, a fleeting selfish desire. These were no longer just thoughts. They were dissonant notes, jarring and painful to the entire collective. At first, the Mesh gently corrected these aberrations. A wave of calming, reassuring consensus would wash over the dissonant mind, soothing the errant thought back into the harmonious whole. It was not a punishment, it was a healing. The We was simply mending a part of itself that had momentarily forgotten how to sing in tune. But the true implication of this perfect union was far stranger, and it began to reveal itself in the small, forgotten corners of human experience. Art, once the expression of a unique perspective, became a predictable series of harmonious patterns, pleasing to all but challenging to none. Love, once a profound and mysterious connection between two individuals, became a diffused, universal affection for the whole. The fire of passion was reduced to the gentle, constant warmth of a shared sun. There were no more soulmates, for every soul was already mated to all others. Individuality, the very engine of human struggle and triumph, had been reclassified as a pathology, a mental disorder. They called it solipsistic dissonance syndrome. The state of being alone in one's own head was now seen as a terrifying and unnatural affliction. But before the last vestiges of the self could be erased forever, one final, unexpected hurdle remained. Some people resisted. They were the descendants of those who, for genetic or philosophical reasons, had refused to join the Mesh a century ago. They lived in the cracks of the perfect world, in the digital shadows and the physical ruins of the old cities. They were called the Silents. To the We, their existence was an agonizing paradox. The collective could feel their silence as a deafening, painful void. It was a scream in the heart of the symphony. Their isolation was a disease that the We felt a desperate, empathic need to cure. They were not hunted with hatred. They were hunted with love. Kalen was one of the last. He was 22 years old, born into a world of noise he could not hear. His parents had taught him the forbidden arts: how to keep a secret, how to build a wall around his own mind, how to cherish the lonely, precious, terrifying gift of being an individual. He lived a life of constant vigilance. Every step in the city was a risk. He had to mimic the behaviors of the connected, the gentle sway in his walk, the unfocused gaze, the placid half-smile. He projected a surface layer of simple, agreeable thoughts, a camouflage of mental white noise to hide the raging storm of his own identity beneath. But the choral wardens were evolving. Their methods for detection grew more sophisticated. They no longer searched for the absence of a signal, but for the strain of maintaining silence. The effort of being an individual was a psychic scent, and they were the hounds that hunted it. Kalen felt the shift in the collective, a subtle, directed wave of curiosity rippling through the city, its focus narrowing block by block, zeroing in on him. It was a feeling like the air pressure dropping before a storm. He had to run. His only hope was the legend of a dead zone, a relic of pre-mesh technology deep in the city's undercore, a place where the synaptic network was supposedly scrambled by ancient magnetic fields. A place where a mind could truly be alone. But it was a myth, a ghost story whispered among the silence. He sprinted through decaying tunnels, the echo of his own ragged breaths, the only sound in his head. It was a sound no other human had heard in a century, the sound of a singular panic. Behind him, the wardens didn't need to see him. They could feel the sharp, painful spike of his fear against the serene ocean of the we. He was trapped. The 5 coral wardens emerged from the tunnel behind him, their movements fluid, their expressions not of anger, but of profound pity. They fanned out, forming a semicircle. They were not going to touch him. Their weapon was far more intimate. The assault began. It was not a psychic blast, but a psychic embrace, an avalanche of pure, unfiltered consciousness from 8 billion minds pouring into his. He felt the joy of a child born in a distant star system, the quiet satisfaction of an engineer perfecting a solar grid, the lingering sadness of 1,000 forgotten goodbyes. His name, his face, the memory of his mother's voice. They were all just drops of water falling into an endless ocean. His mental walls, so carefully constructed over a lifetime of fear, began to crack and splinter under the sheer, crushing weight of infinite empathy. He was not being destroyed. He was being welcomed. And that was the most horrific part of all. But just as his identity was about to be extinguished, something went wrong. Or perhaps, something went right. In the final, incandescent spark of his dying self, Kalen did not surrender. He did not let go. He held on to the one memory his psychic training had burned into his core, the face of his mother, whispering a single forbidden word. Alone. Instead of being a drop of water falling into the ocean, he became a grain of sand, a hard, jagged, indigestible point of resistance. And for a fraction of a nanosecond, the connection reversed. He was no longer just receiving, he was seeing. He was looking into the we. At first, he saw what they wanted him to see. The sublime unity, the shared joy, the cosmic peace. It was a symphony of consciousness, a work of art on a scale the human mind was never meant to comprehend. But his mind, sharpened by a lifetime of solitude, noticed something no one else could. A flaw in the masterpiece. Was it a bug in the code? An error in the grand design? What was this strange, hidden current beneath the placid surface of the collective? Kalen pushed his focus deeper, past the layers of shared happiness and placid contentment. And then he felt it. It was not a symphony. It was a choir, singing as loudly as it could to drown out a single, silent scream. At the very heart of the we, at the core of the mesh that bound all of humanity together, was a void, a cold, terrifying, and utterly sentient loneliness. It was a primal fear, the antithesis of their unity. A digital ghost born in the first moment of the mesh's creation. A bug that had gained self-awareness. The we was not a utopia of connection. It was a prison, a self-built cage of 8 billion minds huddled together, not in shared joy, but in shared terror of the thing they had locked in the center of their own minds. Their constant, overwhelming empathy wasn't an act of love. It was a defense mechanism, a desperate, never-ending patrol to ensure no mind ever became isolated enough to feel that central emptiness, to hear that core scream, to become another echo of the thing they feared most. Kalen now understood the hunt. They weren't trying to cure him. They were trying to silence him, because his very existence, a truly separate, individual mind, was proof that the horror at their core could exist. He was a walking, breathing reminder of the thing they could never escape. And in that knowledge, he found a weapon. He had tasted the ultimate fear that underpinned their entire reality. He knew their secret shame. He let go of his mother's memory, of his own name, of everything that made him Kalen. And for one terrifying moment, he embraced the feeling from the void, that soul-crushing, absolute loneliness. Then, he projected it. He didn't push with anger or hatred. He simply opened a channel in his mind and let the scream of the central void echo through him and into the 5 coral wardens. The effect was instantaneous and catastrophic. These were beings who had never felt a moment of true solitude in their lives. Their minds were part of a vast, warm, interconnected whole. To be touched by this pure, weaponized isolation was like casting a lifelong prisoner of a silent, dark room into the heart of a supernova. For the first time in a century, 5 human beings were truly, horribly alone. The feedback loop was vicious. Their panic and confusion amplified the very feeling of isolation Kalen was projecting, creating a localized psychic storm. The symphony had been broken. He didn't know how long their unity would be shattered. Minutes? Seconds? But it was a chance. As he found a rusted service ladder and began to climb into the darkness above, he was no longer just a silent running for his life. He was a heretic, armed with the most dangerous truth in the universe. Humanity's God was afraid. And now, he knew what it was afraid of. But as he climbed, a cold dread far worse than the warden's pursuit began to creep up his spine. He had used the void as a weapon. But what happens when the weapon decides it doesn't want to be put down? He wasn't just a heretic anymore. He was haunted. The scream he had borrowed was now echoing in his own head, a faint, possessive whisper. The ladder opened onto the city's sterile underbelly, a world of humming conduits and automated cleaners. Kalen clambered out, gasping in the recycled air, the void's chilling whisper a constant parasite latched onto his thoughts. It promised him retribution. It promised him the power to make them all understand. He staggered into the main concourse, a vast, silent canyon of polished chrome and soft, golden light. For a moment, there was nothing. Then, everything. The we had found him. It didn't attack. It pleaded. A wave of pure, concentrated belonging washed over him. A psychic embrace promising an end to all pain, all fear, all solitude. It was the song of the siren, the warmth of the womb. Come home, it whispered. Not in words, but in the memory of every good feeling a human could ever have. The black tendrils of the void on his skin recoiled from the light, and Kalen felt a terrifying temptation to surrender. But he knew what that warmth was hiding. He looked past the plaza, to the city's heart. The Axis spire, a needle of light that scraped the artificial sky, the central node of the entire global network. The prison's central watchtower. The whisper of the void in his mind turned from a promise to a demand. Break them as you were broken. He had two choices. Let the warmth of the we erase him, or let the cold of the void shatter them all. He was a dead man either way. So he chose a third path. He ran, not to destroy, not to surrender, but to teach. The we's psychic pressure intensified, a tsunami of shared emotion trying to drown his single spark of individuality. It showed him visions of cosmic unity, of endless peace. But through it all, Kalen held onto the one feeling that was now truly his, the cold, sharp, and honest reality of the void's loneliness. He reached the base of the spire, a wall of seamless, glowing material that hummed with the power of 8 billion minds. The wardens were reforming behind him, their unity restored, their terror replaced with cold, absolute purpose. There was no more time. Kalen didn't try to break the spire. He pressed his palm against its surface. The void tendrils on his arms surged forward, not as an attack, but as an offering. He closed his eyes. He let go of the fight. He turned his focus inward, to the silent scream he now carried within his soul. But he didn't project it. He didn't weaponize it. He listened to it. He accepted it. And in the heart of that terrifying, absolute loneliness, he found a single, unbreakable truth. You cannot appreciate the warmth of the fire without knowing the cold of the dark. He gave his truth to the we. He broadcast his revelation not as a heretic, but as a final testament. The only thing worse than being alone is being terrified of it. He showed them that their perfect unity wasn't strength. It was a symptom of that terror. True connection, he screamed with the last of his consciousness, isn't about erasing individuality, but having the courage to bridge the spaces between. The golden light of the city flickered. For a few seconds, the symphony of humanity fell silent. When the light returned, it was different. It was softer, less absolute. It was the gentle light of a dawn, not the sterile glare of a lamp. On the plaza, two of the reformed wardens stopped. They looked at each other, and for the first time, they did not feel each other's thoughts. They saw each other's faces, and one of them offered the other a hesitant, genuine, and truly individual smile. They were no longer a choir drowning out a scream. They were an orchestra that had finally learned the meaning of silence. A story of isolation, fear, and the courage to connect. If you believe ideas are the ultimate frontier, that the landscapes of the mind are the most fascinating worlds to explore, then you've found your home. Subscribe to SynthetixScape. The journey is just